This is Edward's tutorial. First, we need to cut. First, cut the skirt hem. First, find a heavier fabric for the hem. This is the largest piece of the skirt. Then use it to measure the length. The length of the hem, that is, at the floating width here. Then, this is the fabric edge. Then measure the length of the hem. Just tear it off. This whole piece is enough to make a skirt. Cut the hem here. Cut the remaining part, the top part of the dress. Then this is the center front. The center front is a single piece. Then the left side is the front. Just place it correctly. Draw it out. Once you finish drawing this part, draw the right side, because the front center is one piece. The right side also consists of 3 pieces. Then flip it over and take a shot. To prevent starting a fire, write the serial number on it. The left side is numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then the right side is used for the English letters DC, DD, CB, shoot like this. As long as you don't make a mistake, you can mark it however you want. Then when stepping on this side, just flip it over like this. You just need to draw it in reverse. After completing the drawing, don't step on it just yet. Be sure to make the markings well. While you are drawing, just easily make this mark. This is the stockpile area. You should mark this point when it's flat, because it is part of the stockpile area, to prevent deformation after completion. Then label it with a number. Then step down. If you step down afterward, if you write this number again, after stepping down properly, this way, it's clearer. When cutting just now, it looked a bit messy. This is 1. This side is A. Firstly, the left half, then the right half, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then this side is A, B, C, D. Assemble, following this order. Then there won't be any mistakes. Once you've stepped correctly, don't put it together right now. If it's in the middle, if you want to add this border, it means this is the kind of border, put it. I'll first splice it between them, like this. We'll talk about it when we do it. This skirt hem has just been finished. First, let's try it on. Let's take a look at the top part. This is what I just finished earlier. This is a stitched belt. Then for the front, chest, and back, there is a seam in one place. You can use mesh fabric. You can also use cotton fabric. This area at the front chest, it is used for making cotton fabric. This one may be slightly easier to handle. Front and back sections. This section is where the stitching is. Mesh fabric, white color, and the trees are also white. It's right here. Add a lace trim here to the trees. Then this is the sleeve. Don't assemble the cuff right now. The cuff has lace. It is trimmed. It is outlined at the edge. The sleeve is this kind. You can't cut it directly. Cut this sleeve out. Make clear markings. This point needs to be spaced. Then this is the marking for the front sleeve dragon. This point also needs to be included. Then the upper part. Then this is the front body piece. Here in the middle, this is the piece. Need to add lace, then stitch it together. This piece is this small strip. Then the front. The points here should be marked. Align it. While waiting, this point must align. This is the chest point. This is the back part. This back part connects to that, the area where the fabric is sewn together. Then there's another piece. It's the hem of the skirt. Here's the fringe. This is a branch. Measure the width correctly, based on the width of the sample, then stitch it together. The wood pieces are the fringes. This branch. Now only the cuffs remain, that piece of white wood, not cut yet. Then this section. When we get to making the top part, I'll put it all together then. Now let's start with the skirt hem, because the skirt hem is simple to make. All right, let's first assemble the skirt hem. This skirt hem section, it's actually in the middle part. Let's start by piecing this side. Then prepare the markers. These markers can be created. They can also be skipped. If you find it cumbersome, just skip it. Measure the length properly. Measure the length properly. Be sure to compare. Avoid making it too short. Leave some extra space. Start with the fresh slices. Then, before stitching them together, draw this seam. This mesh fabric, you can see through this mesh fabric, see this seam. Then it's easier to do it this way. After you've drawn it well, just follow this. The pen's mark looks like this. Just sew it on. This piece is the edges of the front design need to be sewn and outlined properly. Then we need to stitch it. Only then can we join it flat with the others. Stitch them together. You need to cut straight down. Don't cut it at an angle. If you cut it at an angle, that side will be short. Trim it to this shape, then cut off the excess. Then with the second piece, this is the front side. I drew the seam on the front side upwards. You can see through it, then along this line, just sew it on. After this is stitched together, turn it over, front side. This needs to be sewn more accurately. The other side should match the standard. We sew. This way, the dots align, can fit perfectly. Be positioned in the center. Then these two in all the colored pieces after they are all stitched together. Then put this, sew it on both sides. Press the seam on the front, then stitch the next piece. 1, 2, 3. The next follows. This method is the same. Each painted edge is assembled like this. The left half is fully arranged. Then let's assemble the right half now. This is fully arranged. After everything is assembled, I start to press the outline. When pressing the outline, pay attention to aesthetics. Don't pull too hard. This will become wider. Then, when ironing the seam, make sure to handle the seam carefully and there should be no hidden parts inside. This way, ensure everything is exposed. Then, press the seam again. Then, for every seam connection, make sure to press the bright line properly. Then, at the waistline here, at the 0.5 partition, press down on the two lines that are being pulled, and be careful not to stretch it out of shape. It should appear smooth. It should be parallel, that shape. Make sure to press down firmly on the pulled lines. Then stop here. Now create the skirt below. Skirt, label is being pulled, then stitch this together. First do this one, skirt hem lung. Press 2 lines here along the thread. Pulling really is 3.5 millimeters. Ouch. Ouch. Write it like this, 3.5 millimeters. Measure it. I usually smoke this. I always use this. There, it's 3.5 millimeters. Then low white, label, 0.5. Press a clear line here. After it's done, start by collecting it. This one. After the flying dart pleats are pulled in, after finishing the pleats, adjust this pleat to be more even. Then the length, make it equal in length, and the skirt hem, sew them together. Then say something. This skirt hem should be left slightly longer by a little bit, needs to be reserved, the excess part, and then can it be trimmed off at the end. If what is left is just right, if it is the same length, in the end, it might not be enough. This is a good way to splice it together. There will be excess in the end. Since it should be done this way according to my suggestion, only then can it be done. Then there will be more. Is it 3 centimeters? It's just that I'm afraid there won't be enough for everyone. Then the excess part. Finally, trim it off. After stitching it together, turn it to the front side, then press it. Then press the seam line. Press a seam line. This is what the front side of the skirt looks like. Then here at the edge, there is a gap. There are no pleats. This side is the same, about 1.5. Everything here is balanced. There are no pleats. Then the skirt hem. The facial features will look good. The next step is to proceed. The next step is to make the ceremonial fabric. It's the same as with the facial features. Cut it out after you have drawn it well. This is the back piece, the left and right back pieces. Then let's discuss the front piece. The front piece is designed to be translucent, that desired effect. You can put one here. This very sheer type of fabric. These two pieces are stitched together. It forms a complete front piece, like this one. This is the front piece. Take a look. This is a sample garment that previously failed, but you can take a look at this mesh fabric. If we use white fabric, the dots on this mesh won't show up, so a transparent mesh fabric was used. The ceremonial fabric appears like this. There is a stitch, then there is another way to do it, like this one. If it is not transparent, if we're talking about this white fabric, then we can make it into ceremonial cloth. Using the entire piece will suffice. There are 2 methods for cutting. This one is a patchwork design, and the other is a whole piece of ceremonial fabric. Then you need to take this pattern, revise it a little, this part of the stitching, take it off 0.5 centimeters, then combine this with it. It becomes a complete gift wrap. This doesn't need to be cut. You just need to align this guideline, just align it correctly, then dip it. Then you get a complete colored film. Then I want to make this kind. It's the one that is assembled. The top and bottom are assembled correctly. Then assemble the sides. There is a point here. Assemble according to this point. This point is opposite that point. It needs to be the most protruding area. Once the assembly is complete, Then unfold the seam like this. The edge stitching is just like this, one on each side. This seam won't shift to either side. This is the front piece of the ceremonial fabric. Next, we'll join the back piece, the center back and side of the back piece. Sew it together. The two back pieces have been stitched together. Then join it to the tip of the front piece. The seams are properly joined like this. Let's take a look at the back side. The seams on the back side need to be properly finished. Otherwise, the finished garment won't turn out well. Then the fabric has been prepared up to this point. The next part will be made, the collar that is being made next. The collar is made of two pieces. This is how the finished product looks. There is a decorative patch sewn on top. Then first create the decorative patch and stitch it to one of the pieces. Once this decorative patch is sewn, put another piece on top. Clamp the floral paper in the middle. Then say one thing, this of mine only contains seams. Then you can draw the seams yourself. This way it looks to measure 0.5. Then use this kind of dot. If this continues for a long time, you will be able to draw it smoothly. No ruler is needed. You can also draw the stitches. Then if you remove it this way, it will be almost done. Then there shouldn't be any issues. Then if it's a little finer, it means connecting them all. It's simply a 0. Right here at the top, suture, then on both sides. This way it can also lean. We're just one step away. I've trimmed off the edges and corners. Let's shape it into a circle. This makes it easier to turn over. Next, we'll narrow the top a little too. Sew it and remove half of it. Once it's sewn up, flip it over. Make sure this corner is turned over neatly. Avoid having too many bulges inside. If they are joined together, it's difficult to work with the car line. After flipping it over, then sew a seam on top. This seam can be sewn around. Then these points also need to be addressed. This is the end point. Then both sides have sharp seams. These items. First align these front middle parts together. Let's follow the steps. Everyone should be familiar with this type of edge painting. Quarter and you can also use fat needles. Then when it reaches the 3-point mark, it should be a bit wider because this edge painting is a bit too narrow. Place it in the center. Then to the back side. Use a hand needle to secure it. Then trim it a little, like this. After the hand stitching is completed, make some adjustments. Following this outline, using a sewing machine might be faster, but it tends to twist easily. Once the lace is completed, begin assembling. Let me point out this detail. This point refers to the bust point. They need to align properly. Let's first sew this part in the middle, then sew this part. If we can use this type of ruler for sewing, I'm referring to this part, a particular spot. If your hand gets accustomed to it, then you won't need a ruler, but the ruler is still more convenient, only in areas with this type of curve. It could be a ruler. If you turn around the corner, then use this method to make the change. At the beginning, it might be a bit awkward, but with time, it will become quite easy. Be sure to assemble the front piece completely. This point must be aligned correctly. The back side looks like this. Then this seam can be unfolded. If you want to be more detailed about it, then split this seam. You can remove the previous fixed thread. Then separate the seam this way. If you spread this out, this part will be a bit thinner. It won't be overly thick. You can sew it this way as well. Iron the visible line on both sides. Then about this seam, it can't tilt to either side because if it tilts both ways, it will lack a piece. So it tilts towards the center, like this one. Make sure to press the clear line here. The back side looks like this. The next step is to sew the pointed seam. This refers to the back piece. While sewing the pointed seam, typically the back piece is placed underneath. Because the sewing machine's pressure angle is beneath the pile. What about below? It will do so. In other words, this back piece is positioned underneath. It means the back piece wraps around the front piece. This is how it is. If you place the front piece underneath, it will look like this. This small oyster ant is not visible. However, the clothing that is acknowledged is quite noticeable. Then sketch a seam. The pointed seam is properly joined here. The pointed seam is properly joined here. Then work on this towards the gauze. The gauze side is also joined with the pointed seam and the front and back pointed seams. If this is hard to manage with a sewing machine, just use a hand needle to sew it a little. This is the well-stitched front seam. It could be described as tearing at. It can be seen more clearly when placed on the white surface. Next, let's discuss the position of this ribbon. You can follow the one drawn on the straight sample to create it. Then I'll explain it further. This one is for the ribbon that is placed on the side. It is not two ribbons. It is the first ribbon. Attach it to this edge. Take off this seam. Once it's sewn, it won't be visible. Stick it to this edge. Then leave a gap the same width as the ribbon. Place the second one. That is this line along this edge. Just sew it over. This is for drawing the edge. No. The look of the sewn ribbon. I sewed it by hand. If you can use a sewing machine, you can also use a sewing machine. Just make sure to turn accurately at the corners. Then sew just one line. Wait until the first piece is assembled before sewing the second line ribbon. And don't assemble it just yet. Also, you need to arrange this in the middle first, the upper layer's flying edge. This is the flying edge of the upper layer. There is also a connecting fabric inside. It would be better to take a look at the structure before proceeding. Understand it a little? Sew this well first, then put this on. Now make these two lace edges. Work on this a little. There are a total of 3. Just use the eyelash edge to do it. If you use this kind of fabric, it will be quite difficult, so we use this one. Then there's no need to roll the edges. The fabric in the middle is this one. It's just this finished lace. Just cut off both sides and it's enough. This one is 2 centimeters wide. Just cut it to the size needed. This piece in the middle. Then this is the lace on the top. After finishing the pleats, usually this is twice its value. After finishing the pleats, connect it to the top. Then this is the bottom layer. The bottom layer connects to the base. All actions are performed after finishing the pleats. Then first connect the line to the bottom. Work on the one above this. Then now I will first proceed to this pleat below looks good. Then connect it to this. Press 2 lines to gather the pleats. Gather it to the same length as this. When gathering the pleats, pull from both sides. If you pull from one side here, it's a bit difficult. Hasn't this side been pulled a little? Then gather the pleats from the same side. If you pull it the other way, it will be secured. After this side is properly done. First, let's join the bottom part. Then place the top part on. Let's start with this one. Once these two are joined together, then we sew. This was originally a 0.5 seam. I trimmed it down by half because it was too wide. When it becomes too wide and you flip it over, it will be here. It will be difficult to join the next one, so you need to remove 1/2. This has been fixed. It's improved in speed. Anyway, you just need to narrow this seam, then flip it over and press the seam. Then flip it over and press the seam. Press a seam that is 0.1 wide. After the splicing is completed here, I will first create the upper thick label. The upper layer is done this way. Just put them together. Then this is the border for the second layer. It is simply adhered on. After it is completed, sew it onto this. This is in comparison to the border is compared to this original one. In the past, it needed to grow out a bit to prevent it from not being enough. Then you can trim it in the end. Fold it this way, draw a dot in its middle. Then sew it onto this pair. You need to turn here when it curves. Make the turn more precise. Then this is hand-stitched by me. Then you must stick closely to this edge. Follow its contour. Turn here. Then when you get to the side, pay attention here. It needs to be made flat. Then when you arrive here, trim this off and then flatten the edges of the drawing. Then sew it back. You can also do it with a sewing machine, as long as your hands are skilled enough. Turn at the corner like this. Don't approach it directly like this. If you approach it directly like this, the result may not be good. Like this, remove a piece like this and turn it. Then just sew it on. I opened it a little. Otherwise, this section also needs to turn. Otherwise, it will be tight. It will be tight here. It looks a bit tight. It won't look like this. The result is this good. And when we reach this point, also, you need to leave some extra margin. Then there's the risk. Let's discuss it in more detail. When making a turn, it's right here. Turn it around. How much should you turn? You need to ensure it's flat here. It won't be tight. That's it. It's not very big. After the lace is done, and here, the one that was looked at before. What about both sides? This lace that is pasted. If the lace wasn't placed before, it's just from here all the way at the start, sew it down, then it's fine like this now. It will cover it, right? So from this edge, press the line here, then stick this lace on top, finish the lace, then turn it over to take a look. Draw stitches all around the neckline. Then here at the turning point, you need to put a mark on it. Make it a bit longer. Then when you flip it to the front, exactly after marking, you need to cut an opening like this. Don't cut all the way through. Don't go past this seam. Then flip it to the front. Also mark the seam. Press it to the front, the position of the cut. Also draw one on the front. The marker for the turn, that's the end point. Corner, these two corners at the back, and this one. This piece of clothing only has the front chest area is somewhat challenging to handle. It's easier to see on the white cloth. The middle section, this corner at the center, the side sections. Then, once the marking is done like this, it will be easier to stitch. This side should face you. Then start by sewing the middle to secure it temporarily. Sew from the center outwards to both sides. Sew to here, this point. Just align with this point, should be aligned together. When turning, make sure to align this mark. This is for the pointed tip. There is a pointed seam here. Align this way. I started sewing from the middle. Now I've sewn to this part at the corner because I've cut a notch here, so when turning, it will be a bit easier. Without a notch, it won't turn. At this point in the corner, let's sew a bit more. This is sewn by hand. The reverse side is sewn up. This is how it is. The cutting edges must be well done. Then this point needs to be targeted. I did it all by hand with a needle. Then look at the front. When it's the front, because it's done by hand, there will definitely be gaps. In this case, it needs to be on the front. When pressing the marked line, it was patched up. I am here, along this edge, pressed on this mesh. This way it can be seen from the back. Press the marked line. Press around. Then iron this. The marks will be gone. Now making the second ribbon. Here the visible stitching has been pressed properly. Just follow the outline of this mesh area. Up to this point, you can use a sewing machine to sew it. Then to this point, you need to find this corner point. Turn, fold it. Then when you reach this point, is there a corner here? When sewing to this point, fold it again. It's scorched. You still need to mark it here. Otherwise, you won't be able to find this turn accurately. But that's okay. This is easy to find. Press down on the one above again, the previous outline. Find these 2 points. Then when you retreat to here, to this mark here, turn again, then go to the middle here. Also sew all the way to this side. This way, the ribbon will be well pulled back. It's actually not pulled back well. It needs to be done a few more times. Then draw the edge of this line. Wasn't I doing hand sewing before? You can use a sewing machine to stitch it again, or I found that this method works as well. You just sew the belt at the end. Sew this ribbon. First, sew it a second time, the first layer, then make clear markings. Sew the second layer. This is also fine. Then the second one. Ribbon vehicle number. This one of mine is, wasn't it a hand needle before? Then the sewing machine operated a bit more. It looks better this way. Actually, these two. I can now also be at. Sew it after all the pieces are assembled. There's no need to sew by hand initially. It's somewhat challenging. Then we move on to the next step. Let's get started on the sleeves. Let's pause here for now. Next, we'll focus on the sleeves. The sleeves are as follows. If we adhere to the design sketch, there are 3 lines, this type of border design. Then for the regular sleeves, you can just use the complete pattern to make it. I'll make 2 sleeves then. This one is just perfect. And this is for creating borders. This has 3 stripes, vertical straight bars. That's netting is used this type of border. Then if needed, you can just ask me where to buy the borders of all sizes are all the same width. You can just follow this width. Then it mainly fixes this shape of the sleeve fabric. This is the cuff, cut according to the pattern. Then when joining, you need to follow this guide 2 to 7. This shows the finished product of one sleeve. Now I will cut another one. Make another one. The pieces for these sleeves are cut properly. Join them together. Then mark the seams first, then sew up from there. Mark the seams accurately. Then make sure to distinguish the front from the back. This is the front sleeve section. Follow the instructions on the template. This is the back section to prevent any unfamiliarity. It's just that beginners tend to be unfamiliar, then make a mistake, then begin sewing. Once the sleeves are sewn together, adjust the collar here. Create 2 dart seams. I used hand stitching because sometimes it's difficult here. The sewing machine might not be able to pass through. This makes it easier. Next, you can use a sewing machine. Make sure to smooth out the adjustments here. Then there's a corner cut here. Round off this corner cut. Just follow the sleeve's outline. After pressing the seam, gather the paper. Beginners must make this mark, otherwise it's easy to get confused. Because it has 2 sleeve pieces. The other sleeves part, there are also this many fabric pieces. You can do them one at a time. If you do them all at once, it can easily get confusing. First, cut out one piece, then cut another piece. Get wrinkles. Actually, the quality of this fabric when piecing it together with a sewn, not much is left. It's of almost no quality. But it still needs to be slimmed down a bit in order to shape this sleeve. That pointed shape. It has a 3-dimensional shape. Then we start stitching. This is it. The lace here is the embroidery finishing point. It's just right for the shoulder seam. Fix a stitch here at the end of the embroidery, then embroider here on the hoop. Pull it to the same length as the entire garment. This adjustment is sufficient. Then, if you're not experienced, just use a hand sewing needle. If you are skilled, then use a sewing machine. This sleeve and the sleeve cap, the fit is good. Then this hand needle. If you think it's not sturdy enough, then use a sewing machine. Remove it again. Actually, hand needle embroidery is the most precise. Also, some after wearing the clothes at the sleeves, it doesn't look right. Then it's the issue with the embroidery dragon. This should normally be cut open. If you don't want to cut it, you can also choose not to cut. If this is cut here, then the embroidery dragon on the cuff also needs to be trimmed. Otherwise, it won't match after it's done on the sleeve. So this sleeve, it must be done accurately. This dragon embroidery on the front and back, don't wear it backwards. When worn backwards, it won't look good. Then gather it here with the sleeve. The cuff is sharply stitched. I'll make another one of these. That's fine. Let's discuss it later. The next one is the cuff pattern. It's an entire pattern. Then, after cutting, assemble it. First, make a reservation. Leave an approximate amount here. Leave an additional 3 centimeters here. Then this side is longer. If the cuff is wide, it won't be double that width. Normally it reaches this point. Then add another width of that. This is a wool board. When cutting it this large is fine. If I mark it on the pattern, it may waste more paper. This way you can save a bit after cutting it. First, take a look at the pattern. This wavy part represents the lace section. Then start to dismantle. Stick to this edge. Draw this part, which is the fabric section, including seams, and then that's it for now. Draw up to this point. Then leave a small seam. The first line it draws represents a clean shoe. Then remove it. This is indeed a clean shoe. Then add a 0.5 centimeter seam. After the drawing is finished, cut along this seam line. After everything is adjusted, this refers to drawing the edges. Are you going to compete with it for shoes? After finishing the drawing, cut this seam allowance line down. After cutting, this is the edge that will be stitched together. After stitching, flip it over. Take a look. Oh, right. Also need to trim this seam allowance. Remove half of the seam allowance. Just do and trim as you go. Then move to this side. This seam allowance is folded to the side that won't be visible. Fold the fabric over to one side, then press down a guiding line. Then, after the guiding line, proceed to the next segment. Be careful not to conceal it here. You need to thoroughly unravel it. Next, measure the width of the lace. This is the nearby line. Then measure another section of lace. This is the guideline for the lace. Then mark a 0.5 seam allowance. You can choose the position for the border. Mine is misaligned. You have the option to choose, actually, this border looks good. If it's something different, in this situation, just pick a visually appealing position. Make sure the attractive part of the border is visible. That's the best. After applying the seam powder, this also needs to be trimmed. Remember not to cut the seam allowance too close to the line. Then sew the next piece. Then turn it over and do it like this with your hand. Make sure to fully unfold it inside. Don't hide it. This looks like a hassle, but it's actually very simple. As long as you know how to do it, that's enough. Then it becomes obvious. Then we move on to the next step. This needs to be aligned. Isn't this wave just for outlining? Align it with this, then draw the fabric section. It's parallel now. It's parallel now. Measure what has been completed. How fast? It's about approximately 0.6. After this near line is drawn, still add a seam allowance. Then this backside. Can you see it? This seam allowance is too wide. It will look thick. 2 layers overlap. Such a wide seam allowance, it becomes noticeable. This sleeve. That is to say, after removing this seam, just the 2 parts do not overlap. This makes it look flat. Take off a little bit of this, okay? Then cut this part off. Then attach the next edge. This one is the middle one, so choose the edge position carefully. What is the width of this? How much should we measure? 0.9. We just need to find a visually appealing position for it. We will place it in the center. Then we won't need a ruler. We can find it this way. Place it around the middle. Draw its guideline. Then leave a gap for powder. In other words, cut these two. Just remove this edge. It's this seam, the dimensions of this border. Simply cut off this edge, then trim one side first. Do not trim the other side. Once it's assembled, trim it again, because you need to measure the dimensions. There will be slight loss during sewing. Then press the dough line. These two should not overlap. These two are for sewing powder. They are exactly opposite. After this one is stitched together, then measure the width of the border in the middle. This way it won't be insufficient, if the cut is just right. After stitching, press a clear line. It will definitely be around 0.2 less. 3 dotted line. This line is a near line. Leave another 0.5 seam allowance. This one doesn't need to be cut. Exactly 0.5 is left. Not parallel, it may not be very accurate. Then let's do this one. Still draw this seam allowance. Trim off the excess. Anyway, as long as the size is correct, that's all that matters. As long as the visible part of its dimensions, it should be just like it is on the medication label. Once the rest is done properly, be calm with this fabric. The next step is to proceed with this. Proceed to this point. Then leave a seam allowance. After cutting it out, attaching lace. Some lace has a front and back side. Then take a close look at it. The nice looking side is the front side. This is the last piece of lace. This is the last piece of lace. Although it's a bit troublesome, but I just want you to understand. After putting on the lace, press the seam on this side, press the seam on this side. This is the width of the lace. Then leave a hem. Then stitch together. After pressing the visible seam until the last part. This side presses the tight seam. This leaves a piece of fabric, and this is the seam allowance. In a moment, you won't need to draw it yourself. Just cut it off. Then place this pattern on top. Cut it to the same size as the pattern. The next step is to attach the chicken feather edge below. The next step is to attach the chicken feather edge below. This length equals to twice the embroidery border. If you don't follow this, there are some details on the pattern. It's also acceptable to follow this size. Embroider the width up to this point based on the width on the pattern. Aren't you following my video? Because it's not certain which size you'll be making. Then press 2 lines and pull out the paper. Attach it to match the same length as this one. Pull out the paper after securing the line. Pull out the paper after securing the line. Pull it until it reaches the same length. Then adjust this paper evenly and connect it together. You can secure a connection here now. Connect using the line you pull. Once both ends are secured, it won't move. Then adjust the pleat size. Make it a bit more even. Do not leave pleats at the edges. Once it's done, you can assemble it. Assembled. After assembling, flip it over. Press a visible line here, just like this. This is how to complete the embroidery head first. Wait until the bottom is complete before stitching this, because if you do it first, it won't be easy to flip when embroidering the dragon. Now let's move on to making the face. This is the face we made earlier. Align the ends, then start by securing a stitch in the middle. Sew towards both sides. From here to here, align the sharp points. Then there is a 0.5 seam in the back middle. It's just right when sewing it together. Collar. Sew it this way. Leave a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. This side looks like this. Then attach the finishing part. Take a look at the front. Then the collar needs to have a cut made. This is the effect on this side. Do not cut all the way through. Then along with this bottle, this is the collar section, the collar we prepared earlier. Then the endpoints are aligned. Then place this collar in the middle. This perfectly connects to the back. It's aligned. It's aligned. Collar. After this is completed here, then it needs a little trimming. Either make some holes or simply sew it. Trim it slightly narrower. If it's made narrower, leave this back center part alone, because when the time comes, this part still needs to be boxed. If it's too narrow, it won't stitch up. Good, good. If it's too narrow, don't mess with this part later, because at that time, this part still needs to be sewn. If it's too narrow, it won't be able to be sewn. Start from here. You don't have to cut. If you're worried about cutting it wrong, you can wait until you become proficient. Make sure to understand it first before handling it. If you don't make the cut, then you should make a cut hole. This allows the collar to stand up. Make sure not to cut off the center back. Leave a small amount. Once you've cut it properly, bring it here. This makes it easy for the collar to stand up. Then, because it is either raised or see-through, so it needs to be trimmed a bit more evenly, it won't be impacted by the seams being too wide, affect the overall result. Quickly finish the collar. It's not that type of embroidery. This is embroidery for the face. Roll it up. Then this is the facial embroidery design. And the inner embroidery, combine it this way because this face was trimmed at that time. So the inside also needs to be trimmed. Otherwise, the lengths will differ. Cut too much, a 0.3 neckline will suffice. Just trim it again. First, align the points. Secure it here. Then embroidered appearance. Sew the seams of the front and the inside together. If the sewing machine is more convenient, then just use a hand needle. After finishing the sewing here, turn it over. The back section, this is the back, isn't it? This is the front. Pull it over. If this is the embroidery connection, it's too thick, isn't it? It won't be easy to handle, so we need to bring it over first. Then we'll attach the embroidery part. This is the inside. Front side. Then take another shot. Do it again. This is the inside. And this is the front. Sleeve. Roll it like this. This is the embroidered design for the front. Then it corresponds with the embroidered design on the inside. Sew the designs together, point to point. The inside embroidery needs to be finished completely. The embroidery on the other side, inner section, then flip it over, then flip it over, then flip it over, then flip it over. Then remember this while sewing. Be careful not to trap this edge inside. This way, the appearance of the embroidery. Then we have the embroidery, then the embroidery design, then the embroidery design. Then remember when sewing. Then remember when sewing. Be careful not to trap this flying edge inside. This way, the embroidery design. This way, the embroidery design is good. Next, you can stitch the embroidery opening. Embroidery opening. Press down on 2 lines. Then collect and tidy up. It looks like this when received. Its length matches that of this embroidery opening. The length of the embroidery opening. Just mark the embroidery opening. Draw it on the fabric. This mark is used for alignment, the floral mark here. Then secure this point first to prevent it from going out of alignment. This point is well put together. It has been stitched together. Next step, turn it over. It seems like this. This point is well put together. It has been stitched together. Next step, turn it over. It seems like this is a seam, side seam of the face. The side seam of the garment and the sleeves. This seam, hem seam. This is how to remove it. Because of this, initially it wasn't taken down very securely here. Don't worry about it. You don't need to stop here either. Just walk straight over from here. In case you want to secure the edge, that's fine too. Just lock it down like this. But the prerequisite is you must start from the clothing. If you start from the sleeve, the inside will be exposed later. So start sewing from this clothing. Sew all the way to the cuff here. This is where it starts. Do not stop here. Just ignore it. Take this ceremonial fabric. You need to place it like this, move it aside, continue sewing down like this. Then the next step is to turn this sleeve to the front side, Then sew the side seam of the ceremonial fabric. Now after turning it like this, just sew the cloth together, sew up to here, sew straight from here to here, then turn it over, then turn it over. This side seam can be fully utilized, separate both sides, then put it down again. Check if there are any leaks inside. It's all right. If the inside looks like this, then it's considered to be without leaks. In this half of the fur, this side can also be done. Repeat that again. Procedure. This is the side seam. The side seams on the front and back. First, stitch the side seams. Sew from the side seam of the garment all the way to the cuff. I made a mark with a pen. This is the thread that has been sewn. Sew straight from here. Do not stop here. While working on this, stuff the garment fabric into both sides. Just keep sewing like this. Sew all the way to the end. Once the sewing here is completed, we need to take a look at this fabric. It can be pressed down slightly at the corners. You can't press the entire piece down on top. This side is the same. Then turn the sleeves inside out, the side seam of the lining. Then a proper evening dress. The underarm should have these 4 lines. This foot is aligned correctly. This one is slightly misaligned. This is okay. I rubbed it a bit, 0.1 units. Use a quick shake to heat it. Once it's finished, this part is the upper body. At the waist, it's this skirt. There's a belt in the middle. Follow the markings on the sample. Draw it on this fabric. Also mark the end point. And what about these 2 points? They correspond to this seam. Draw the edge here. This is the side seam because this is quite small, but it's just about the same as the waistline. So this needs to be folded. Fold it to match this length. Layering, then fold it up. After folding it up, join together. Align the end points. These 2 points need to align with this seam. This is the side seam. As long as there's a mark on top, just align these points. That's it. Fix this point in the middle, then align this, then slowly adjust this pleat. Pull it to the same length as this, then here. Also add a stitch to secure it. This is how I do it. Align all the points, then adjust the pleat amount evenly. After adjustments are made, then stitch them all together. This is of equal length, the waist tie and the upper part. They are exactly the same length. Once stitched, turn it over. Now let me talk about this pleat. We should push this pleat forward, leave a little less pleat here, and move it forward. You can also leave a little bit of pleat here, not too much, it's almost imperceptible. Then it's evenly distributed at the back. It should be flatter here in the middle at the back. The focus is mainly here. It's being refined. If there are things on the side, it might look a bit weird. It's best to focus on the front. Then, the next step is to stitch the skirt. This is the skirt made before. Skirt hem. 2 lines are being gathered. Then this is attached to the waist. The waist knot is sewn here. If the sewing machine can't pull the thread here, then you need to use a hand needle to adjust the fabric. That kind can be easily adjusted. This one is a bit tight to adjust because there is a gap here. The next step is to sew the waist knot and skirt hem together. The end result is quite good, and here there are hardly any wrinkles. This piece stitched in the middle, it's flat with no wrinkles, and in other areas the other pieces have wrinkles. This edge is the side seam. This is stitched to align with the side seam. This side seam is first extended down, then align with this side seam. Always align with the center back. Sew the waist seam here properly. Take a look at this point. Each one needs to align. Only this one doesn't need to align. It just needs to be adjusted evenly, but it's best if the 2 are in symmetrical positions. The important part is the side seam. Also, this seam needs to be aligned. There is no quality in the middle here. After the waist tie is stitched together, the next step is to attach the skirt hem. Ceremonial fabric. This ceremonial fabric, it is like this. It is just a straight strip. Then cut according to the dimensions on the straight pattern. Bottom white rolled edge 0.25. This is the baseboard. Roll 0.25. Then stitch a clear line. This is where the waist connects, two gathering lines. It's the same method as this skirt hem. After gathering the pleats, connect it with the waistband of the fabric. Here at the skirt hem, customer service representative, then sew together. This section. This section has a knot. Then align it. Once knotted, it will stay in place. Then continue to pull until the end. Cut off the part near the fish. If it's just right, that would be even better. No repairs are needed. The waist seam of the fabric here is stitched well. Next, let's work on the back center. Here, roll the edge back to 70.5 here at the back center. Then, in relation to that, this way, assemble it together. You can first mark the seam lines. This is the same, then fold it accordingly. Just press the seam and you're done. Fold all the way down. One side of it, one side is thicker, it's like this. The bottom comes to here, then stop, then the other side. Is the same method as this. Also roll it back, sew it up. Sewing. Then one thing to mention is this waist knot is misaligned. The bottom is longer than the top. To ensure the quality is more distinct, if everything is piled together, it's a bit thick. The thickness of this brocade. After it's done, the next step is to make the Velcro. The first step with the Velcro is to align it. This applies to both the top and bottom. Align the bottom. Use the waist area as a reference. Align the waist knot here. Then, this is the most prominent part of the bulge. The bulge is the largest area. Draw a dot. These two are joined together. Then begin to attach the Velcro. This side is the fuzzy side. Then it should be left this long. I made some adjustments to this one. Sew to the spot marked earlier. And this one as well. This is the side with the plastic print. This is the hook side. Then this one should also be left long. It's also up to this point. Then stop. Once it's completed, we need to make a comparison. Can these two knots match up? This point that has been marked. Can it match up? That way their lengths will be equal. After putting it together like this, cut off the excess. Next, trim it well. This is the step forward. In the next step, create the flower pieces. This is the part, this is the type of flower piece, similar types of flower pieces. Next, open up this skirt, measure the lengths. It should be twice the length of the skirt. You can just fold it like this. Folding it to make it a bit longer is fine. It can also be trimmed at the end. I'm currently twisting this flower piece, then sew it onto this. If it's an industrial machine, this type of single-layer flower patch can be directly sewn. But if it's a domestic machine, it will definitely jam in the middle. While I was sewing, I heard a sound. It simply snapped. Then you can place one underneath it. This is referred to as water velvet non-woven interfacing, occasionally spun interfacing. Just sew it when you reach the edge. Watch it closely as you place it underneath. Make sure it doesn't get crooked. Then this thread will no longer break. After we finish with the thread, these are 2 lines, then start drawing the paper. This is the position for drawing the edge on the skirt. You can draw according to the instructions. You can also draw it yourself. This is the position in the middle of this material piece. Set a point like this. Then here is also a designated point. The height of this point is approximately what? It can be slightly shorter than this edge. Make sure it bends like this. It won't reveal this area below. By comparing like this, we can determine where to place it. I'll draw it right here. Then each one is drawn to this height. This also establishes an endpoint. So little by little from here, draw out this shape. If it's not drawn correctly, just paint the one that is indicated. After you have painted them all like this, draw the outline. This is the center position. Insert the paper correctly, then adjust it uniformly. This way, relatively speaking. Locate the center point. Attach it this way, along this outline. Using a sewing machine is fine too. Using a handheld sewing machine is fine too. As long as it's done accurately, that's fine. Mine starts sealing from the middle, seal it up to here, right here, then continue sealing until the back center. The back center should originally be. First, create this edge outline. Take a step back, just clip it inside. But if you do it this way, I started to forget, this way is also fine, as long as it leaves no traces. Then do this side now. This side starts from the middle, then fold. This fold is not large, very small. Don't pile too much up. If there's too much, the outcome will be it will explode. The lines are not smooth up to here. Look, this is a very minimal kind. Then come here. Turn, sew it up bit by bit, use a hand needle to baste it, then use a sewing machine. That's it. Mine is sewn with a hand needle. When you sew to this point, then cut it off. This raw edge needs to be folded back. Align with the hem of the skirt, then sew it. Just stitch it together. That's it. When the lace is ready, bring this back together. Align this Velcro, align the waist tie. Let's start here. Go down to the bottom, ensure they are in line. Then use this, extend the Velcro placement. Press here to draw a line. Continue drawing down to the end, then just sew along this line. Sew from here all the way to the end. Then at this point, at this location, it's just that point where the mark was made earlier. Then just press a few reverse stitches. And then like this. When opening it up, it won't crack. Just sew it securely here. And then like this. When opening it up, it won't crack. Just sew to this point to finish. Then this dress will be finished. Let's discuss this section. The seams here, because it is of that type. The type that has a belly, right? Then the side. There are nearly no pleats here. The pleats are gathered here. Pay attention while sewing. This is also possible. Yes, big cover song of This is the Belt Professor. This is the pattern. It's a pattern that consists of only 2 pieces. Then draw the seams on it. The first step is to stitch the bottom line, the line underneath the car. If this sharp corner, if the turning is not accurate, then drive the car all the way, then reverse a few times. Let's draw this line again. This is also a very sharp corner. I only drew the line underneath. I drew it this way, draw it this way, then turn it over. All right? This kind of thing. That needs to be turned over. Often needs a little trimming. Don't repair too deeply on this side. We can just stop the repair here, because when we get to the front side, that part is still useful. That's it for now. Then flip it over. This point should be flipped more sharply. It should match the outline of the pattern. It's the same when you bring it over. Now handle the top and the sides, fold it back along the seam. Iron it briefly, and if it doesn't need to be pressed, because there is no hard version, just by hand, just on hand. If it's cottonwood, you can simply press it with your hand. Do it like this. Fold the seam back, then for both sides, also fold a seam, then fold it in half again. After getting it right, car line. When dealing with the car line, start pulling from here. Here. Otherwise, you won't be able to get through this thick section. Starting from this thin area, begin. Then make a turn, it will be a bit easier. Then come back and connect. This is it. It looks like the line is properly pulled. Then install it here. Yes, set a snap button. You can put it on the doll. After testing it, see which position is suitable for attaching buttons. Then I won't film it with snap buttons. It's that type of letter button snap button. You can press it up, just connect it like this, do it on top, use decorations, decorate below. This is a type of nail art type diamond that is glued on because it has no hole. Then inside here, attach the small